Hi, I'm Sabrina Brown, founder and CEO of Girlfriends Tea, where we offer magnificent luxury tea with your enjoyment in mind. You can visit us at girlfriendstea.com and click on Shop Now, where you receive delicious flavors such as Uniquely Golden, Unapologetically Berry, The Other Bourbon, and the ever-popular Belle of the Ball. Because ladies, we are all the Belle of the Ball. Thank you for joining me for a cup of tea. Good evening, everyone. As always, I am peachy dandy excited. Can y'all see that smoke? That's coming from my tea, y'all, because y'all know Girlfriend's Tea is smoking hot with the smoke, right? But I have a smoking hot couple, and I mean smoking hot as far as their testimony, giving God all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise. So I'm going to bring them in here, none other than my friends from Calvary Bible Church. Happy to have them here, Keith and Noelle.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi, y'all are so cute. Everyone, I told them that earlier before we went live. I said, y'all are just so cute. And I just love your story, your testimony, your whole family. All of us do. But I want to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to interview you.
Of course,
Absolutely.
of course. We're looking forward to it.
Yes, I'm looking forward to everyone hearing more about you two and what you do. So before I get into that, of course, I want to thank you for joining me for a cup of tea. Love it, love it, love it. Everyone, in case you don't know, those who are just joining maybe for the first time, I have my own luxury tea line, girlfriendstea.net. You got to check it out. I'm drinking Unapologetically Berry, which has elderberries. I didn't even hear about elderberries, everyone, until COVID. But just check out the flavors. But now to the true tea of the day. This is good tea. This is God's tea. Keith and Noelle Drakeford. So I'm going to share a little bit about them before we get into their miracle story. So share. I always ask you to share, but especially share this one if you want to encourage someone who's been believing God for what God said. So I'm very excited again to welcome Keith and Noelle Drakeford. They've been married for 8 years. Keith has worked for Verizon for the past 13 years, where he's worked his way up from an entry-level consultant to an assistant director. Noelle has been a pediatric physical therapist for 10 years, but has been primarily a stay-at-home mom since the birth of their first child. She is also an adjunct professor at ODU, teaching in their pediatrics programs. They share 3 children, which we'll find out more about: Judah, 4, Ezra, 2, and Caleb, 7 months. They live in Chesapeake with their children and enjoy having both sets of grandparents locally. So I'll share a little bit more about them. But what I want to ask you all first and foremost, because I love a good story. Love a good story. The girlfriends, we always want to know about our guests. So what I want to know is, of course, when I was introduced to you two, you both were already married. Mm-hmm. So how did y'all meet? Take us back.
Yeah, so I did some pursuing. At the time, it was social media, Instagram to be more specific. And actually, one of her best friends posted a picture of her. And at that point, I accosted her through her Instagram DMs. I slid in her DMs.
Started liking all the pictures.
Yeah, started liking every single picture. And one thing led to another. At the time, she was in Northern Virginia. I was in Norfolk. So we decided to meet halfway, and we had our first link up in Richmond at Buffalo Wild Wings. Yep.
Buffalo Wild Wings. I love it. I
Yep.
love it. So, Noelle, what was your first impression when y'all were out at Buffalo Wild Wings?
First, so we met, and the first time we talked on the phone, all night. It was like 7 hours we talked on the phone, and so I was intrigued, but I wasn't really ready to be in a relationship. So I was kind of like, oh, we can be friends. But after we met the first time, I was like, okay, this could potentially be more. And after that, we never stopped talking. I would say I wasn't ready, but talked to him every day and talked to him all the time, and then next thing I know, we were.
She was playing hard to get.
She was playing hard
A little bit.
Yeah, she was playing hard to get.
I love it. I love it. Well, everyone, welcome again to this interview. Again, share it. You might want to share it because this is a powerful testimony of how God moved. I can't get enough of the testimony. I'm tickled pink about it. But I want to pause to thank our sponsor. Thank you, Ivy Hill Technologies, for all that you do to support Girlfriends Tea. So we want to share about Ivy Hill Technologies. You can find out more about Ivy Hill Technologies at ivyhilltech.com. They do IT. They do enterprise as far as HR. They've got it going on. So at any rate, I want you to check out ivyhilltech.com. ivyhilltech.com. And they have some great jobs on their site. So I just looked at the positions on their site. Some great positions on their site. So thank you again, ivyhilltech.com. So getting back to you all, Keith and Noelle, I like that you both wanted to have children, and you'll talk about that throughout this interview. But the scripture, Psalm 127:3, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. And I know that's how you all feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got married, but I want to ask first, did you grow up with siblings, both of you? And what were those relationships like?
Yeah, so I'm the middle of three girls, and so I grew up very close with my sisters. Me and my older sister are less than a year and a half apart, so we did everything together, very close. And my younger sister as well, and so I always wanted a house full of kids.
Yeah, and same with me. I have two younger brothers and a younger sister. So having that family dynamic and growing up together, predominantly underneath my mother's household or roof, of course, gave me a desire to want to have not only have kids, but for them to have siblings as well. So yeah, definitely.
Well, I can say for me, and I don't know why, everybody, well, I guess I know why. I just wasn't wired that way as far as my DNA. I never desired to have children. I didn't grow up around a lot of children, but I never desired to have children. But I know that you all did. So at what point did you always know, even before having children, that you want to have children?
You know what? I'm not the type of woman who like grew up daydreaming about having kids and was always like, oh, my purpose is to be a mom. And, I even say like when it comes to me being a stay-at-home mom, like I never thought I would have done that. I was very career driven. Like I have my doctorate in physical therapy. So I was, got my degrees and, I'm just headstrong into my
Wait a minute. Come on, girlfriend. This is what we do now. The girlfriend just said she had her own degree and her own vision for herself. Come on, somebody.
I love it. But when I met Keith, though, and when we got married, it was, they said that God would give you the desires of his heart. And so once we linked, I never daydreamed about having children and none of that until he and I got married. And I know it's because he had a very strong purpose for us as a married couple, but also for our children. And so very early in to our marriage, I really started to have the desire to have children.
And what about you, Keith? Did you always want to have children?
Yeah, I felt just this visceral desire to want to have children and to have multiple kids because I wanted to have the opportunity to pour into them and to also have that experience of fatherhood. I think just even from my early spiritual formation, I think the church context and culture sometimes can have an emphasis upon it, and I think that kind of drove a little bit of it as well. That wasn't necessarily catered towards singleness, and I went like 8 years single and celibate for quite some time. So like the emphasis, some of the desire of pushing into like a marriage and family structure dynamic was because of the people I was surrounded with. But I think as I began to grow and understand more like that this was an extremely selfless decision to have kids, I knew that that was a desire of mine. Yeah. And even oftentimes I think during like Father's Day, when you have the call for all men and fathers to stand up, and going through years of like in my mind disappointment of not being able to stand with fathers, I think it's with a hint of toxicity increased the desire. Not that it wasn't disingenuine, but that some of the desire increased just based on some of those narratives.
Excellent. And I know I've shared this before with you, Noelle, and trying to get this interview. Y'all, I've been trying to get with him for 3 years, and we're gonna talk about that. But I just want to share this. I have, well, let me go ahead and share it, everyone. So I initially asked Noelle for an interview, but it wasn't the right time. I don't know if you were pregnant then or you just had your first child. Then I asked again. And then I was like, this time I tried to bring Keith in because I was like, Keith, I had both of them, well, maybe Keith help me get an interview. Keith said, go through Noelle, go through Noelle, because she's the one dealing with the babies. But Noelle was in the conversation, y'all. So I was in order. It was a group conversation, but I wanted Keith to push her for the interview. But I finally got it. But here's the funny thing, everyone. I said, Noelle, we got to do this interview before you have. They had already had 3 children, right? For you had a 4th one. She said, "Won't."
I said, don't even worry about that.
Don't even worry about that. So look, y'all, we already getting ahead of the testimony, but God blessed their womb so much that she was like, God, we're done. We're full. She had decided to choose on God. Who knows? He might have given y'all 5, 6, 7, and 8.
You had to turn the faucet off for sure.
And it turned the faucet off. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So the story, this is when I first was introduced to your story for both of you. On October 19, 2019, Noelle was interviewed by Lady J, affectionately known as Lady Janine, at Calvary Bible Church, which is where we all go. So that's when I first heard your story about wanting to have children. It was very touching. And I have not seen that interview since, but I remember elements from that interview. So it impacted me greatly. So Noelle, take us back to that period where you were happy to be working with children. I remember Lady J showed the footage of you, what you do with children, but it reminded you of your desire to have children of your own.
Yeah, I feel like, when you want something so bad, it's easy to turn it into an idol. And I feel like one of the lessons that God taught me during that time of waiting was, if I want this thing, I need to focus on the object of my desire. So I need to focus on God, my gift giver, and not just the gift that I want, And so that was a period where God really taught me how to humble myself and serve the people who have what I want, and it was really difficult because there I was every day, I worked with babies. At that point, I was working with babies up to like teenagers, but, so I was going into homes of women who had just had babies and being around them all the time and, pouring into them and serving them, in a way that God prepared me to, but while still like nursing my own disappointment and my own desires. And so, I mean, it had its difficult times, but I know one thing I do remember talking about in the interview was how God showed me, like every day I was working with these kids who had birth defects. They had, these diagnoses where doctors said they'll never be able to walk. I remember, and I was working with a child who was never supposed to be able to walk. And we were working on jumping and skipping, or a child who was never supposed to be able to speak. And I would come in a session, they would say my name, so God showed me almost on a daily basis miracles, and so it helped me to believe for myself, to see it all around me. And so that was the blessing of being in that space. It was tough, but because we leaned so heavily on God, I feel like he showed up for me when I needed him. So I feel like it would be like, I would have a tough day. I would find out I wasn't pregnant or something, have to go to work, and we'll go into a session and a child would do something that was just amazing. And it would just be a reminder from God that he still works miracles, and just like, we read in the Bible, like miracles are still happening every day. So that really blessed me being in that position.
I just love how you didn't even know this, but we know the backstory. We know it now that we're at the end of the story, but he was foreshadowing, and you didn't know it, your miracle. Right. But I just love that you took delight. And that's so important for all of us while we're waiting, while we're actively waiting, that we take delight in what God is doing in the present, because
Mhm.
He wants us to live life to the fullest,
Right.
not just when we get what we want,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think it was very intuitive that you realized that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, Keith, I know that Noelle's work, as she just shared, was rewarding and it was an outlet for her desire to have children. But did you have an outlet to help you cope with, while you were waiting on God? If so, what was it?
Yeah, I did. I actually had a few. So part of it was, and this is a shout out to one of my children's godfather. His name is Amos Bennett. Um, Me and him, we worked together, and his spiritual formation was a little bit different. I was raised Church of God in Christ, and we believe in miracles, but like we weren't like indoctrinated with miracles and surrounded with them on a daily basis and seeing like the miraculous taking place. But my friend Amos was, and he was one of the people that kept my confession aligned concerning what God had for us concerning children. So for me, what that looked like was oftentimes I would say, um, if we get pregnant, and he would say it's not if, it's when you get pregnant. So he was like one of my accountability partners when it came to fatherhood, and he also directed me to some scriptures around, how God called Abraham father of many nations before he bore any children. So he had me operating from a place of projecting where God was going to take us to. So that was extremely helpful. And then I think the other part that I think kind of aligns with my wife's perspective is serving in church. I think oftentimes, I think at that point, I was the director of the dream team, and having the ability to serve people amid what we would call like an empty place, or just a place where we have lack. I think it always puts things into perspective because it shows often that though God is concerned about the things that concern you, there are bigger needs, and you actually are filled when you're pouring out. And I don't think I understood that until we started really serving. So as we served and we were pouring into people, that was God's way of filling us during the season of disappointment. And that was probably one of the most critical lessons I learned during that process, was that you actually get more when you're pouring consistently.
I love that. It reminds me of the oil and how God extended that little jar of oil. But it's so true because we know that God is unselfish. I mean, He's dealing with us.
Yeah.
He's dealing with us. He has to be unselfish
Right.
because He sees everything that even our besties don't see.
Yep.
And He still loves on us. And, sometimes we don't pay attention to what He's doing, but to just be able to empty ourselves, our desires,
Yeah.
and focus on what He wants. And we know that's what the word says,
Yeah.
that we are to meditate on His word day and night.
Yep.
Then He'll make our way prosperous, and then we'll have good success. So there's so many scriptures that point to putting Him first.
Absolutely.
And as the people in the audience are saying, delight yourself in the Lord. That's what He wants us to do, to delight ourselves in Him. So, Keith, I have another question for you. Now, as I was talking I remember what Noelle shared at the church, but you were diagnosed as being borderline sterile. So everybody may not know what that means, because I'm like, borderline is either sterile or not. So can you explain that for us?
Yeah, sure. So I had two andrology reports. Two times I got an analysis as far as a tested EVMS, and they test for motility, mobility, and shape, as well as volume. And essentially, both reports. Actually, the latter report came back worse than the first. So both reports essentially stated that it would take some scientific assistance or some medical assistance more so to help us get pregnant, which is kind of what initially spew us on a path of immediately going to IVF, because we knew that my count was so low that I pretty much was essentially what you would consider sterile from a volume perspective.
Well, you know what? We all know the greater the odds
Mhm.
against something happened, the
Yeah.
greater the testimony. So, I mean, there's no discounting that this was a miracle,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
period.
absolutely.
Yep.
Because God gives man, his body, our bodies are in order. We're not operating on a different spectrum every day. There's
Mhm.
order.
Right.
Yeah.
And when God does it, he does it. So I love it. I can't get enough of it. I'm excited about it. So you both considered in vitro fertilization, but God said no. So how did God impress upon your hearts the no?
Yeah.
Like, how did
So
you know?
so I have always been a journaler, and so I've kind of journaled off and on. It's kind of been a big way of how I learned to talk to God. I started journaling as a teenager, and I've always kept my journals, and I'll kind of start and stop, And prior to meeting Keith, I was in kind of a backslidden state, trying to get myself together. I had gone away to college and didn't really keep up with my faith, and God was pulling me back to Him. The same time I met Keith, and he was going through his own process. But so shortly after we met, actually, so this was 2014, we met. And shortly after we met, I had gone to a Bible study, and the pastor asked, "What's something that you have always wanted to ask God for?" And I had written in there to have children naturally. And so this was shortly after we got married. I mean, after we met, sorry. And so I had forgotten all about that. And so there was one day we kept having all this opposition with the appointment. So we actually had started the process. So we went through insurance. We sat down, talked finances. We knew how much it was going to cost. We had started having appointments. I had to have a procedure done to make sure my body was ready. And we kept having all these problems. So like an appointment got canceled one time with us not knowing.
Yeah.
We went and sat so long that Keith had to go back to work one time. There was always something, and when you have tunnel vision, you want to say, oh, this is the enemy, so we're like, all right, beat the enemy in the name of Jesus, but you don't know that could be God,
Yeah.
So I was praying one day and I was writing in my journal, and I said, Lord, I realized I had never asked him what we were supposed to do. We just went straight to God. We believe you for IVF. And so I said, Lord, I need you to make it plain to me. Like, I need to know, I need to hear from you. And at that point, I hadn't really heard from God. I hadn't really learned to distinguish his voice, really. And I was writing in my journal, and I wrote in it, Lord, let me know if this isn't what you want us to do. And I closed my journal, and then I started flipping through it, and I found that journal passage where I had prayed. I had written in my journal, asking God to give us children naturally. And this was shortly after we got serious, so I knew that this was, something that he already knew coming into marriage, that this was a problem that he had. And so I'd written that, and I completely forgot that I'd asked God that. So that was my reminder, and so I took it to Keith, and he said, all right, let's cancel all the appointments. And we canceled everything. We canceled all the appointments. This was November. This was 2016 after we got married.
Yep.
And we decided we were going to trust God.
Yeah. And I would say too, I wanted to add, I think oftentimes, because this is a sensitive topic for people who are believing God for conception. And I think even the IVF, I just want to make sure I put out there that like that's not a blow to anybody's faith, because God works through science and works through doctors and works through medicine. And however God gives it to you, you have to have enough discernment to know how God's leading you, because there have been several babies conceived by faith through IVF, through IUI. And I think there just needs to be some level of conscience, because some people, that may not be their testimony. It may not be the extreme version of where God took us to, which was like, you're going to have them naturally. That was unique to what he spoke to us specifically. But I think that, since we're talking to a broad audience, that there needs to be some discernment when it comes to what is God telling you to do concerning where your faith is at, because to some he gave 30, 60, and 100-fold. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out there, because we've been in that community. And I think sometimes it could be a sore spot, as though us going natural is a jab to people who do IVF. And that's not the message we want to communicate.
You look in the Bible and you see how many different ways Jesus healed blind.
That's right.
People who were blind. It was several different ways, And so some people was sometimes instant, sometimes it was action you had to do. And so, we always say, because, when you're in a place where you're hurting, you want something so bad, you're waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. Because I was there where, somebody we knew who they had been trying for a long time. And she said she just didn't buy any products she assumed her cycle wasn't coming. So she didn't buy any pads or anything. So I was like, I'm gonna do that, You know, she got pregnant when she did it because God told her not to buy any pads or products. When I did it, I was just without. We had gone on a trip, and I was like, I'm believing in faith that we're gonna be pregnant. We went to Greece, and I'm not taking anything with me. And so there I was in Greece doing something God did not tell me to do with no pads with my cycle cane. You know, so it's like you have to have the discernment and have that relationship with God to hear what He wants you to do specifically.
I'm glad you shared that because I thought about that will be a sensitive thing. I mean, even for everyone some people will be trusting God to have a baby naturally, and it may not be their will for them. And so we have to be I think it's wonderful that you're sensitive to that. A friend of mine had IVF, and and she has a son now, and I'm so very happy for her. She did it as a single person because she wanted to, and now she's married, but when she got married, she would have been too old to have a child, and God blessed her in that area.
Yeah.
So how did your faith in God, you're already sharing it, by way of journaling and staying in prayer with him. But we know we miss it sometimes, often really. So how did your faith in God help you to keep the faith? And what were some of your favorite scriptures that you used?
Yeah, that journey is so difficult. And like even now, even being so far removed from it, like I still get emotional sometimes thinking about it because it's so hard to feel like this is something your body's supposed to be able to do.
Yeah.
And even though I know it was, Keith had something diagnosed on his side, it still felt like as a woman, I want to give my husband a baby. And people say things, I have people say, oh, give that man a baby. And like, you never know what somebody has, going on. But those were some of the darkest times of my life. I mean, I definitely went through like a bout of depression. And I feel like up to this point, like, how I feel like we have a lot of churchism. So people will kind of say, oh, you say I'm blessed and highly favored, and you just, slap a church saying on top of how you really feel and pretend like you're happy and you believe God, but in reality, that wasn't our reality. Every day wasn't a faith-filled day. And even, we started a YouTube channel while we were waiting and started to share. And I would have people message me and say, oh, how do you stay, in this place of faith? And I'm like, I have to fight. I had to fight to stay in that place, and the scriptures, like writing out scriptures, I would have to put them all around the house, on my mirror in the bathroom. We had them on the fridge. We had sticky notes. We had a board with sticky notes. Because the enemy will try to attack your mind, and you have to battle thoughts of like, it's not going to happen for you, or, fear, just fear was a lot of it, and so I had to memorize these scriptures. And at the time I had like 5 or 6 scriptures like memorized, and I would just have to speak back to the enemy. Because we were talking about this recently, that's what, when Jesus was tempted by the devil, he spoke back to him. He spoke the scripture back to him, and so we had like our core 4 or 5 scriptures that we would kind of send to each other every now and then just to encourage each other, or we would, write out and repeat and memorize. I know one over here. There's one that in Deuteronomy 7:14. Deuteronomy 7:14 and 15. The Lord will love you and bless you and increase your numbers. The fruit of your womb will be blessed. You will be blessed more than any other peoples. None of your men and women should be childless. And so like scriptures like that we had to just recite and memorize to keep our minds in a same place.
Yeah. And I would say too, I know when the YouTube channel, which is yet alive, it hasn't been as active, because God actually birthed it amid our despair. So we birthed it when we were going through the infertility journey. He didn't wait till we came on the other side to give the story. So we were telling the raw data, like on the spot. And I fought against it myself because as a male, like not being able to produce kids is it provides some level of shame from a cultural perspective. Like, and one of the scriptures we anchored ourselves or our YouTube channel on was Exodus 23, 25, and 26. And it says, worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be upon your food and water.
I'll take sickness
from among you. You shall not be barren, and you shall not miscarry, and I will give you a full lifespan. So that was probably the anchored scripture, but it was also resources too. So there's a book by Narita Walker called God's Plan for Pregnancy. That book was probably one of the most critical books we read. It talked about like supernatural birth. Her husband was actually sterile, and they ended up having 4 kids. So it's a great resource for anybody who's believing God. And I would say, we're talking about infertility, but I think what we're talking about is broader, beyond, because people are believing God for stuff outside of infertility.
Right.
That may not be the audience, everybody's journey. There might be some senior people in here is like, I don't want to have any more kids. I'm not trying to have an Abraham and Sarah story, but they may be believing God for something from a health perspective. So I think that book is great.
Yeah.
Another good book is by Lysa Turkerts. It's called It Wasn't Supposed to Be This Way. And that particular book, hands down, helped us process the grief during the 3-year infertility journey. And I think part of that was she talked about the churchisms. I think it was we had to learn how to navigate disappointment in a healthy way. I think oftentimes you're just told, like, you know, and coming from a Church of God in Christ background, like, we can preach you happy, right? So, like, I think like weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I mean, that sounds great, but I mean, Monday outside of Sunday, Monday through Saturday, I'm struggling with this fight. So that book taught us how to process disappointment and to lean into it, not away from it, and to just understand and let God deal with that, because it's a natural emotion. And I think oftentimes we try to shy away from it. I don't think God wants us to live in it, right? But Jesus experienced every single emotion. And I think oftentimes people turn the emotional switch off, and it actually leads to depression and leads to suicidal thoughts and leads to other things, because we haven't been taught how to process grief. Another tool we kind of leaned in on, and I'm just throwing a whole lot out there, was counseling, marriage counseling, and just counseling in general. I think we needed a biased perspective during that period, because we wanted to have a healthy marriage while we were going through this process. And seeing, I think as a male, my desire was to protect my wife, and knowing that I felt like I was part of the problem at times, like, just because I knew like what the testimony was, that became a challenge in and of itself. And I had to really lean into God through fasting, praying, and then making sure that I'm present for her, because when she got, as much as I knew what the diagnosis was, when she got the multiple no's, because it's the journey that you get results on a monthly basis, right? So it's like either you're pregnant or you're not.
You have to confront it every month.
She would feel a level of shame and feel a level of responsibility tied to it that really had nothing to do with her. It just was the overall journey that God had for us. So I would say community is extremely critical as well when you talk about resources and also scriptures. I don't think it was just just all scriptures. It was community. We were around faith-filled people who we have a litany of text messages and people who've prophesied over us, and people who sent us a text saying, I saw you having kids. And even down our own bishop, shout out to Bishop Courtney Macbeth, he actually, during a platform where we were sharing, he prophesied over us that he saw 3 kids sitting at our feet. And now we're actually living in that manifestation. So I think also being in the right environment around the right people, they help to cause your faith to leap, almost like when Mary and Elizabeth met and the baby leaped in the womb. You need people around you that's going to cause your faith to leap, so that even when you have those downtrodden moments, you have people around you that are locked in with the vision that God has for you.
Look at God. That village is so very important. Like you said, that community that kept you anchored on God. And I just love Isaiah 43. I think it's Isaiah 43:13. That's right. Indeed, before the day was, I am he, and there is no one who can deliver out of my hand. I work, and who will reverse it? I love that about God, because he is the real deal. He is a sure thing.
Yes.
He is the sure investment. And
Absolutely.
as long as we are willing, because he doesn't put it upon us, as long as we're willing vessels, he will use us for his glory. But I want to get to the exciting news. When you found out you were pregnant. Tell us all about it. I mean, you didn't got to tell us everything, but you know what I mean. Tell us about that moment. And whoa, like, did you start feeling sick? And I don't know, you may have already shared it, but I don't know the story, so I want to hear it.
Yeah, so at that point, part of the frustration was as soon as we decided to cancel all the appointments and trust God and believe him, my cycle started going crazy. So I would be 20 days late from my expected cycle date and not be pregnant, it would be 10 days. There's no consistency. It was all over the place. And so for the sake of sanity, I would just test on the same day in my cycle every month, just to get it out the way, because, thinking, am I pregnant? Am I not, every day like that? That was really weighing on me. Yeah. And so we had to test almost every month for 3 years. It was like, there was maybe a handful of times where my cycle came before, but almost every month we had a test. So that was 3 years worth, and so I think, I had daydreamed about, how I'm gonna find out by myself, and I'm gonna surprise Keith, and it's gonna be like this and like that. I had daydreamed all these things, and I always would take the test myself. I would look at it and I would tell Keith every time. This was the one time that he looked at the test first. So I said, how was that, Lord? I done looked at 35, 36 tests. I got 36 no's. And he looked once. And so when I had taken a test and he had gotten up for work, and he looked and he was like, hey, this second line is kind of faint. And I was like, what do you mean the second line? Like, I've never seen the second line, so we were in a place where I wanted to be excited, but honestly, it felt too good to be true at first. It had been so long that we've been waiting for it. It didn't feel real. Yeah. And so we were excited, but it was still like, okay, well, let's take a digital test tomorrow, and then we took another test, and when we saw it, it took a while. I feel like it wasn't until we saw the heartbeat that it really sank in, and that first appointment, we found out, we not only saw the heartbeat, we found out my due date was actually Mother's Day of that year, which was just,
icing on the cake.
Yeah, it was just like, those are those things of like, God, it's like, he didn't have to do that. The baby and itself was enough, but I feel like he loves us that much, that he will do these things to make us smile, to make things even more special. And so I feel like that was, I don't think I was emotional until then. And it just felt like, my father, was just handing me this beautiful gift and wanted to make sure it was, wrapped perfectly. That was more of the beautiful moment. It was less of what I had rehearsed in my head, and I'm going to surprise Keith, like, it's going to be like this and like that. But it was more so just that moment with God.
Yeah. And I would say myself too, I feel like, I know there's a story in the New Testament where the church is praying for Paul to get out of prison. And then Paul comes knocking on the door, and the Bible says they're astounded. Like, but this is the thing you praying for.
Yeah, they didn't want to believe it. They're like, "What's that? Is that really God?
Oh, you're really here." So it almost felt, that's like kind of how it felt. It was like, you've been praying for this for over 3+ years, and the blessing's actually at the front of your door, but you're in a state of shock, or almost like disbelief, because God really came through. And I think to her point earlier, I think some of it was it took a while for it to soak in, because the journey had been so long. We cried so many tears. I mean, we've been snotty nose at the altar. We've fasting. We've literally done everything. We built a nursery a year and a half before we actually conceived, and had to go in and see, an empty nursery at the time. So like, the journey was, it seemed like it was an eternity. And I say that in context, because I think everybody's journey is their journey. And I know people who have been on this journey longer than 3 years, so I say that in context because I think everybody's journey is their journey. So, but for me, it definitely was one of those moments of like shock. Like I really couldn't, even until the date we actually gave birth to our daughter, I still was in shock. Like, this isn't real. Yeah,
she was right there. You still couldn't believe it.
And I still was like, and then I think I finally had my moment. Like, I think the day after she was born, and I sobbed in tears, just like, God, you're faithful. Like you really heard our cry, and like on the opposite end, you always knew that this is where we would land. You just allowed us to trust, and you held our hand through this journey and didn't let us fall apart. So for that, I'm eternally grateful.
I think it's amazing as faith walkers, and it's just only natural. I mean, because let's be real. We read in the Bible and see how God spoke through his man or woman of God, and people doubt it. But then when he did it, it's like, I can't believe you did it. I can't believe you did it. I mean, we just go through that. Like, did you really just do this? And, even though he might even tell us, sometimes he impresses it upon our heart. But it's like, God, you really did this. So that faith walk is real. I think there are very few who have unwavering faith where they don't doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and God's okay with that because he knows that we're not doubting his ability. We just
Right.
don't know if we read him correctly. You know,
Yeah.
that's really what he wants for us. So the other part of the inquiring minds me want to know is, what was the reaction from your doctors? I mean, the first time, and for the second and third time. That's what I want to know.
Well, we didn't go back to those doctors because we were, originally with, infertility specialists.
Mhm.
And I remember calling and telling them that we were going to try on our own and them being excited for us.
Mhm.
But then we didn't have to go back to those doctors. I was able to, see a typical OB and midwife. But we'd still, and even to this day, like I love for somebody to say, I just wait for somebody to say something, but I got my hands full. Because I'm like, now you're going to catch a testimony. Every chance I get, and even when I remember I'd had Judah and then we got pregnant with Ezra, we had them 18 months apart. So it was like rapid fire. So I remember when I went back, my midwife was like, you were just here, and I was like, yeah. And this is my story. Like it's amazing, that I'm back, especially being that quick because we weren't supposed to have any kids, And so it was more so on that end of getting to share with new providers, this is what my story is. And both of us, I mean, every chance I get, I'm excited to share because too, it keeps my heart in a posture of gratitude because it's very easy to forget what God has done. We were even talking about in preparing for this interview, we kept a note that we shared between our phones of anything we received, any prophecy, anybody had a dream. We had a lot of people who were having dreams about us being pregnant or dreams that we had, and we kept it all in a note. And so when we needed encouragement, we would go back to that, but I haven't looked at that in years, and so going back and reading through and remembering some of the things that God told us and then seeing how those things manifested, like, it's been such a blessing, and so we're grateful for the opportunity to share our testimony because it's, we have 3 kids. Our oldest just turned 4. So we had 3 and under for a while, and which is crazy. It's crazy sounds. It's probably crazier than it sounds.
That's why I couldn't get that interview.
Exactly. Yes, it was busy.
You were busy.
Kids. But having the reminder, like being reminded, like this is difficult. This is a lot. But man said this couldn't happen. So that reminder that like I'm literally caring for miracles every day. Like my children were not supposed to be conceived naturally, and it helps fix my perspective, and remember that like if I have these kids and they're this close together, God did this purposefully. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a whoopsies accident, nothing like that. This was purposeful from God. So it helps us stay in a place of gratitude to remember, where we've been and to share our testimony.
Well, I wasn't the only one watching because I know y'all had a village, and I'll get y'all to share about that. I mean, the family. I saw all the pictures of y'all doing the reveal. I mean, I remember all of this. And there was a time when I was just hearting every photo, because y'all had so many photos, I was hearting every photo of Judah. I was like, my God, you just fell in love with how God did it for you all. Not that we wish anyone that pain.
Right.
But it's so much sweeter. I say, I don't know. I've never had children, but when a woman gives birth, she forgets all of the suffering because of the joy of the gift from God.
Yeah, it's been a blessing. And we definitely have had, that's one of the, when God called us to share while we were still waiting, I was very apprehensive. Like Keith's called to preach. He's the outgoing, hop up on Facebook Live, share a word. Like that is not me at all. I'm not like, that's not my personality, So initially he was like, yeah, we're gonna start a YouTube channel. We're gonna, and I'm like, I'm not about to do that. And especially to talk about something that's so sensitive, and honestly, it's, sharing your faith, and to share your faith, you have to be in a place where you really believe it. And there were times when I was, I didn't fully believe it, and so God helped me work that out through sharing, but what we gained from sharing it was then, there were so many more people who were witness to that miracle when it happened. I had so many people messaging me saying that was the first time that they had prayed for somebody for something big to happen, and then they saw that God answered a prayer. Like that's so far beyond us. It's God teaching people how to, pray and have faith and believe him for miracles through our family, and even, we came back to church after being away, the pandemic and the babies being young and everything. And even to this day, I get stopped so often from women who remember the testimony, when I shared at Glow in 2019,
Yes.
and they're like, man, I remember, I ran into this one woman who I hadn't seen since then. And she was like, oh, I heard you had a baby. How old's your baby? And I was like, which one? And she was like, what do you mean? She had no clue that we had 3 kids, that fast. So it's been, our village has grown so much. There are so many people who have heard of our story and were praying with us, and that's one thing that I share with people that I come into contact with. I have women who will contact me and say, pray for me, and, what things helped, and like being transparent and open, and it doesn't have to be on a big platform. Not everyone is called to,
Right.
to put everything out there, but to have someone that you're talking to so that they can rejoice with you, because ultimately God wants to get the glory. And, just like you said, it's like the odds are stacked. He wants to stack the odds so he can show off,
Come on.
get the glory. And it's in sharing your testimony and being transparent that he does get that glory, so that, I mean, in our families I know you saw in the videos, like they were believing with us. And
right. I saw all of it. I mean, I'm just telling y'all, the joy. Oh, the joy of everyone just rallying around you all. So I have a few more questions. So during the interview at church, you just mentioned it, Glow. I recall you speaking about how you were in a group with some wives. I'm assuming they were wives who were believing God to have a child, and how uncomfortable it was for those who were finally blessed, with pregnancy, for those who, were still waiting for their joyous occasion. So it was a joyous occasion for those women, including yourself, yet like any loving friend, you feel for those who are still believing God. And I remember you were talking about how you were in the group and some other women would get their blessing. So how did you feel sharing the news, and how are you still encouraging your friends?
Yeah, it's hard, because when you know how it feels to be on the other side, I think you're especially sensitive to others. I had to navigate seeing people, popping up pregnant every 2 seconds. It felt like, when I was, waiting, and I had to learn that two things could be true at the same time. I can be happy for her, and I could still be, sad for myself, or, disappointed for myself, and those two things can happen at the same time, right? Because initially the enemy would make me feel like, oh, you're just jealous, or so I had to learn how to navigate that. But I always wanted to be, once it did happen for us, I wanted to be very sensitive to the women I knew, who were waiting, but God really had to, minister to my heart and remind me of, like Keith mentioned earlier, about, Elizabeth and Mary, and how that example, that's hope for somebody, and so, we shouldn't feel ashamed of what God has done through us, because he hasn't done it for somebody else, but that's how we can be, a point of hope for that person, and I can say, like, look at me, there's nothing special about me or Keith. Like, God is no respecter of persons, so if he did it for us, that means, he's in the room, like he's here, he's working these miracles. And so, but I had to learn that, because the enemy wants us to be quiet. He wants us to not share what God is doing. He wants us to not share what we're going through, because if he can get you by yourself, then he can manipulate your thoughts. You'll have a random thought and you'll think it's your own thought, and it's the enemy, and so it takes some sensitivity. And even now, I'm still connected to several women I know who are still waiting, and God has given us a burden, a heart for those who are, still walking through that. And we pray regularly for people that we know of, who are in wait. And I think it has strengthened my faith to go through this, and like you said, I would never wish this on anyone, because like I said, to this day, it still is very painful, but I know what God has birthed out of us through this, and not even just our children, like our faith, and, the way that we're able to share and our testimony, and how, we've been able to share with other couples and things like that. Like, there's so much that God can birth out of a difficult place if you will invite him into it. Like Bishop was saying just this past Sunday about, a situation can be stressful if you're driving, if you're in control. That same situation can be stretchful. It can stretch you and prepare you for something bigger, if you let God into it.
Yes, I love that, stretchful. I love that.
Yeah. So we learned a lot along the way, and I've definitely, like, I try to, any chance I get, tell people, of things that people said to me that came off as insensitive, because a lot of people don't realize. I think people aren't trying to be mean, but people make comments all the time, I think, about just women's bodies in general, of when are you going to have a baby, or you getting old, people make comments not knowing
Yeah.
you're
Mhm.
going through something. So that's another thing that we try to do, share about things that were hurtful to us, so that maybe somebody who would have potentially said something like that learns from that,
Yeah.
and is able to be a little more tactful and sensitive with other people who might be going through the same thing.
Well, I've seen y'all travel, so I tell you what, having the kids did not stop your travel. So let's talk about that. Navigating. First it was Judah, then it was Ezra and Caleb. So tell us about that first family with all of them vacation.
So we actually just got back from our first official like big trip with all three. And so when we were waiting our consolation prize kind of to ourselves for every year that we did not get pregnant, we went out the country twice a year every year. And so we had a great time. We traveled. It's a huge part of like who we became as a couple.
Yeah.
And then we had a baby at the very beginning of the pandemic. So all that was shut down for a while. But we've been taking the kids on a couple trips here and there, but we actually just got back from Disney World.
Yeah, that was good.
When did we get back? Sunday?
Friday.
We just got back Friday. So it was, it is work.
Yeah.
It's not a relaxing vacation to go lay on the beach, but it was important to us because it's such a huge part of who we've always been. And so it's always been important to us to get back out there and travel. We had to learn you got to adjust your expectations, and keep the children in mind, so I might want to, go stay out at the parks, from, 8 to 4 or 5, but like, can my kids handle that? So it's a lot of being realistic and having to adjust the trip from the trips that we were used to taking together. But I think if you manage your expectations, you can handle, just about anything. And so we went, we had a really good time. All 3 kids did very well on the plane. Thank you, Jesus. We even had a delay. We were stuck on the tarmac for 2 hours?
Yeah.
And the kids, everybody held it together. We were praying. But yeah, so we've been able to, I had a friend tell me to introduce the children into our lives, and so that they would kind of pick up the rhythm of like, this is what we do in this family. We like to travel and be out and about, and our kids have adjusted well. So,
and I'm going to let Keith lead off with the response to this. Parents are protective anyway. But considering your walk and your faith or your testimony, Keith, I've seen you, we all seen you when you're the children and you're just cuddling and kissing on your children. I just want to know how it feels. And of course, mothers protect too, but you're the covering. How does it feel, the weight of just, I would say just being the overseer or the protector, not just of the children, but first it was just Noelle. Now you have the children. Share it with us. That weight, it may have been great weight, but I'm sure there was a weight.
Yeah, well, I think, I try to lean in, and this has been through just growth. Jesus spoke about, my burden is easy and my yoke is light. And I think when you're navigating this space, you have to be very careful, because the thing that you call a blessing, you can feel like it's a curse if you're not navigating the season well, right? Just like the children of Israel finally got into the promised land, they had to deal with all these people they didn't take care of before. They were supposed to take care of them. So now the very thing they've been crying out to God for, they're crying out again, saying, Lord, like, take them, So I would say that the weight of it initially was extremely overwhelming, if I'm being candid, so much so that I recall sitting at the changing table. This is when we had Ezra, so our second child, after we had Judah, and both of them were sitting on the floor crying. I had Ezra on the changing table, Judah down there crying, and I checked out. I was physically present but mentally gone. So I knew then I needed to lean into resources, and this was all during the pandemic, so we had pandemic babies, so we weren't getting out as much as we wanted to. Community was through online services, so it was a very challenging season, and that was what thrust me into therapy, and there was a lot of support that both of us needed, because we were in here like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde some days, like we were just trying to stay sane. I mean, in all transparency,
that's real talk. I hear parents say that all the time.
We were getting smoked that first 2 years. We didn't figure out how to balance it. And the irony is that because the same way we went at God when we were in desperation for this child, I think what I what I've been grown to understand is that I need to keep that same energy after having the kids. So when you talk about like how do I feel from the protectiveness and like having to take on this responsibility, I have an understanding that I'm co-parenting with God. Like God doesn't have any grandbabies, right? So like I'm his son, my son is his son, you know, so like now I think more of it is I lean into him. And most of my protectedness is through prayer. Like I told my wife the week before last, I was in prayer, and I know it was nothing but the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit had me praying for the preservation of our kids' virginity. And that's something that's so far off, but I'm understanding more that like there is a part where I have to be there present and help disciple them, but then I have to lean into the spirit realm because like these kids were birthed with an assignment and I need to be sensitive enough. We always pray, Lord, help us to parent these children according to their calling. And I think I wasn't necessarily taught that. So I'm on this same journey that Abraham was, going to an unknown land, but we're learning how to disciple our kids.
Right.
So I feel like I'm in a better place because a lot of my energy is leaning heavily into the kingdom, is leaning into scripture, leaning into prayer, leaning into fasting, leaning into keeping my priorities straight. And then some of that is required sacrifice. And I think if you're going to be a healthy parent, you gotta shut down your social media at times. You gotta, you may not be able to watch as much movies as you want, or you're going to be disengaged. And I think God, he didn't put us in this place for us to check out now. Now there's a time where he's like, no, like you start in an early age, you disciple them, you rear them, you show them this way so that when they're older, they won't depart. So for me, the burden was initially there, like the first 2 years, because I really wasn't leaning into God the way I needed to. But now that I'm leaning into him, I feel like God's shouldering the burden. I'm able to cast those cares upon him. And even though I'm not saying that it's challenge free, because that would be a lie. But what I will say is that he's keeping my head above the water. And I said this to a couple of my male friends. I feel more connected with my wife with 3 kids and some of the crazy mayhem that goes on with 3 kids than I felt when we had one versus when we had one. So it's like, though we have more responsibility because I'm shifting that load to God, we're able to stay connected the way we need to stay connected to. So we're operating with the upside down kingdom, understanding that God, like, this is you. And like, you gave him to us. So like, you need to help us with this whole process. So I think that's been like the understanding we've had. And that's where I've anchored myself at. And even my wife, as far as like how we handle this load, because this load by ourselves is stress. But to Bishop's point, it's stretchful when you give it to the hands of the king.
Well, see, we rarely have men on the show, but look, when you say you shifting that load to God, come on, shifter, come on, because that's powerful. That is powerful because it reminds us of where our help comes from.
Right,
absolutely,
where our help comes from. He's the most excellent counselor, and if only we could shift. Really shift that load. So as parents, we're getting down to this is next to my last question. What is your routine from sunrise to sundown?
Our routine. So
I start.
He starts.
Well, she really starts the night before.
I basically don't stop. First,
she doesn't stop.
I have the baby. He still is waking up overnight. And so since I get up overnight with the baby, then I'm able to kind of sleep in a little bit, and he gets up with the toddlers.
I get up with the toddlers. I fix breakfast for everybody. I fix coffee. I make sure water's filled. I make sure kids have their medicine. I change the pull-ups and all of that. And then she transitions. She takes over. I go to work, and then I come back, and we kind of clock in, and we knock out the rest of the evening together. And then after that, then we kind of have our own time together. Oftentimes it's devotion first, because we got to fill ourselves back up, and then we connect with each other.
Awesome. I know I dropped off something to Noelle today, and she had Caleb with her on the hip. I said, "Home girl is not playing." Love it. So I have one last question. The girlfriends have been here. Everyone, make sure you share the video of this interview so that others will be encouraged. So now we're here. And I know you've already shared some great words of wisdom. And I'm going to ask again for someone just coming on. What advice or encouragement, you've already spoken on that, do you have for families trusting God for their miracle baby? And I do like what you said, Pastor Keith, about that, it may not come. It doesn't have to come. It could come other ways. And I like that. Let's not limit God, but just let's encourage those, because there are many who are
Yeah.
still trusting God.
Yeah, one thing we always say that, our inboxes are always open. We, I often have women who will message me and will just, see parts of our testimony and to say, pray for me, or, so we're always here if anyone needs encouragement or wants somebody to talk to. I think particularly for men, I think women were better about talking to each other and asking for help. And I think for men that the outlet often isn't there, especially Black men, you know, but two, to really lean into God. I think I realized through this process that I didn't have a real relationship with God before this. And so this is something that he used to draw me to him. And so, you could go on and on about like, did God cause this? Is this from God? Is it from the enemy? I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. God's able to work everything. Everything comes together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. So regardless of who this is from or what it is, God can use this, to accomplish his plans and his purpose and to perfect you if you'll let him. And so there's like a deep despair and desperation that comes, from wanting this so bad and seeing other people having it. And for me, I really had to lose myself in God. I had to take all of that, all those emotions, they're valid. I had to take that all to God. That was the only way that I was able to survive that, and we talked about, resources. There are so many books and podcasts and, Instagram posts. There's so much out there. Like, we're so blessed to be living in an age where we have access to so much, and that God doesn't just speak through just your pastor on Sunday, learning to read the Bible for yourself too, but also like when you're hurting, like surrounding yourself with that positivity, reading these books, we would watch, YouTube videos, just look up a topic and watch something just to see someone else's testimony, so then that would give us hope. Don't just, internalize everything, and just go about it quietly. I feel like, we learn that sometimes you pray to God and you're in a storm, and sometimes he's going to calm the storm, but sometimes he'll just give you friends in the boat, and I feel like for us, God placed us with friends alongside us who are believing the same thing, and having that like community of belief, we could uplift each other. I had a really close girlfriend that I met at Calvary. We were believing at the same time, and we bonded so much over being able to message each other like, hey girl, I'm having a rough day. And, she would send me a Bible verse, or vice versa, so you don't have to, we weren't created to live in isolation. We were created to live in community. And so leaning on, your community, and there's no shame. The enemy wants you to feel shame. Those emotions, those thoughts, those are from the enemy, and so I think reaching out into your resources and being connected, at a church and connected with other people is what I feel like really helped us get through on the rough days.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say, just to add a little bit to what my wife has already spoken, is having that community is critical to you being able to process your emotions. And I think oftentimes within that community is you just put your head down and just keep going at it. And you're like, okay, maybe the next month. But I think you have to be extremely careful when you operate from that place, because that bleeds and breeds toxicity, and it leads to depression. And I think both of us dealt with bouts of depression during the process of like believing God for children, because this seems like something you should just do. And I think because you see it happen for other people like that, like we've been around several instances where like somebody said, I'm gonna get pregnant, and they got pregnant the first time they tried, right? Then you feel like, well, what's wrong with me, God? And like you're handing out blessings over here. We went through those moments of like, okay, this person's pregnant. Wow. Like and I think there's a self-righteous piece too, that you have to stay connected to God so that God can address self. And I think some of that was what he was dealing with within us. Like sometimes we feel self-righteous, like, God, you should be doing this for me. But I would say this: God deals with everybody according to their faith. And I said this before in a video I shared. I think oftentimes what we don't understand is that God is not fair, God is just. And what that means in layman's day term is that God doesn't do it the same for everybody, but he's just because he does it for you according to what he's called you to. I just told my wife this yesterday. The man that was blind, the disciples asked, is it this man's sin or his parents' sin? And Jesus said, none of them. This was produced so that God would get glory. And when you're in the storm, when you're in the process, when you're in the baking place, it's hard to gain insight from that vantage point. But oftentimes God works his best work amid disappointment. It is oftentimes the birthing ground for miracles. And I think people don't understand that when they're in the midst of it. It's very challenging. I'm not saying that we managed it well. There were seasons where I wasn't talking to God like, hey, you just ain't gonna get no prayer tonight. Like we ain't talking, like that's just the real side of like, because I was so disappointed and distraught that God, you would allow this to happen. And I feel like I'm doing everything right. So I would say, I think also balancing out that piece is extremely critical because God is just. And my encouragement is that the Bible says that he's faithful that promises. So staying in a place of faith does require you to resource and be around the right people and community. And faith comes by hearing by the word of God. What sustained me through that season and my wife was the word. Like we stayed in the word. When I say we were pounding that word, like first thing in the morning, we were sitting here in devotion side by side for an hour before we even went to work. And I think people don't understand, like, this was not an easy walk, but God used our desperation, the thing we desired the most, to pull us closer to him. And then we got to a point where it was like, it wasn't at the desired level. We just were like, God, you're going to do it when the time gets here. And like, let us keep pouring into community. And as we were pouring into other people, God was pouring hope back into us. And then now after the fact, 3 kids later, which is wild work, like it's 100% like God's grace, favor, and mercy. We're still in a position to be able to pour into people, even with the bandwidth we had, because he was teaching us during the season of barrenness how to pour out amid barrenness. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I would encourage people, like in your barren season, that's the fruitful ground, in my opinion, for God to do his most gracious and most powerful work in our lives is when we have. And that barrenness doesn't necessarily have to be a womb. It could be sickness that you're going through. It could be, a loved one that you're praying for. Whatever that is, it causes a level of desperation and desire for you to do what it takes to get the job done. And I think that's the biggest message is like, don't waste that season because you haven't got what you are expecting God to do in that moment.
Now that is a great way to bring this to a close. It really is, because I feel that way as a single woman. I really do. And people say, oh, you're so great at it. You're everywhere. You're sewing. Yes, but I still have that desire. And that's just real talk. But I'm able to still function because there's so many other things that bring me joy. So I'm able to just keep pushing. I mean, it's not hard, but some days it is, especially around holidays or whatever the case may be. But God has given me the gift of being able to really entertain myself. I will say that. I'm serious, y'all, because I get right here. I mean, even with y'all, I can just have fun. So that's what's keeping me. Not that I haven't dated, but I do desire marriage. So my point is, everyone, the translation of this doesn't have to be this rich interview. Doesn't have to be just felt by those who are waiting on, as Pastor Keith said, I'm calling you Pastor Keith, Minister Drakeford. As you all shared, it doesn't have to be just that. I can get out of this for what I'm expecting God for. All of us have a waiting season because he doesn't, if he delivered so fast, we wouldn't grow. There would be no exercise because he wants to see mainly how we handle him in the wait. He knows we're going to be happy when he delivers. So how can everyone find you? I know you have a Facebook page, but I want everyone to take note of their name and how to spell it. So I don't see you on Facebook anymore, right, Keith?
Yeah,
No, it's just
yeah.
me.
It's just her.
Okay, just Noelle. So follow Noelle,
Mhm.
follow Noelle Drakeford, and get fed from her. And if you want to contact Keith, are you still on IG?
I'm on IG. Yep.
Okay,
Keep
all right.
here.
Okay. And get with them because they are very, very, I mean, just following them, you're going to be blessed. You're going to be blessed. So there we are. All righty. I brought these photos in and I just want to close with these photos because y'all, I stayed up to 1 o'clock in the morning capturing these photos. And Noelle, what I didn't realize, I mean, I know modern day miracle is not a new term, but on May 8th, 2022, you wrote here, we didn't always believe, but our village of prayer warriors, friends to sow tangible faith reminders like this onesie, because you showed a onesie that you got from Shanika Vale House, and those who'd already received their faith babies helped us along the way. Us not only conceiving, but conceiving too at this time. And under 2 years is a modern day miracle. My mouth dropped when I saw that because
Yeah.
that's what I titled this, a modern day miracle. Nobody but God. So look at this. You can explain this, Noelle. You shared something privately with me if you want to share with the audience about this picture.
Yeah, so this picture, we look all rested and and we've been well nourished and all that. This is before we had kids, but it's interesting that you chose this picture because this was September of 2019. We had actually just found out we were pregnant and we were out of town at my cousin's wedding. And it was like our secret, like nobody knew yet because it was days after we had found out we were at this wedding. And so we weren't sharing yet until we, went to the doctor and all that. So yeah, it was like a little secret between us. But yeah, I think I was just starting to feel some symptoms. But so it's funny that you chose this picture. This is like when God had, he had blessed us with the miracle, and nobody knew yet.
God is amazing. I love that. That's where you're showing your first pregnancy with your daughter, Judah. The first one, that was number one. Look at that. I love what you did with the doll baby.
Yeah.
It's showing her size. I mean, I just love this family. Everybody does. And there's Ezra. Oh my goodness. Look at that. It's Caleb, right?
Yep, that's Caleb. Yeah.
And then all three of them together. And then you all.
Beautiful.
God is so good. We will continue to pray for you. I have that video up. I like to close out on it. I don't know how it's going to look. So let's just see. I'll try it.
See miracles. See miracles. See miracles happening for you. See miracles. I see miracles. I see miracles happening for you. If you believe in something long and hard, if you believe in something with all your heart, it shall come to pass. I see miracles. I see miracles. I see miracles happening for you. I see miracles. I see miracles.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you all.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, that was.
Oh, it was beautiful. It was I stayed up to 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. This is what I do. This is my gift that God has given me. I just love spotlighting others, and I'm honored. I'm absolutely honored that I had the opportunity to interview you both. And as we do, our tradition, Keith, but Noelle knows we close our interviews. So look, y'all walk through the fire on Girlfriends Tea, and now y'all are guy friend, girlfriend. You can't be a girlfriend. I know you
Right, no.
in your very white voice. Show you right on that one. So thank y'all so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having
joining us for a cup of tea. Everyone, please share this video. God is amazing. Thank you again. And I'm going to follow up with you all over the years as the kids grow up because I'm particularly interested in encouraging everyone. I love you all. Thank you so very much.
All right, everyone.
Okay, sweetheart. Talk with y'all soon. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
It's something about like talking about everything and then seeing
Yeah.
that video. It's like we live this, but
Yeah.